All right, in this chapter we're going to talk about digestion and nutrition of animals. In particular, we're going to talk about human digestion and nutrition. All animals have some way of taking in nutrients and digesting it for their own cells. So we talked about sponges. They are going to draw water in through their pores, and they've got amoebocytes and cyanocytes that are going to digest that material and spread those nutrients around to their bodies. And then we've got the cnidarians, the flatworms that have kind of like a simpler digestive system, where the cnidarians have just a sac-like digestive system where it goes in the one hole, gets digested, and then it goes back out the other hole. It isn't until we get to the roundworms that we have a complete alimentary canal digestive system. So an alimentary canal is a long tube going from mouth to anus. And there's different layers in this alimentary canal. We have the mucosa, which is the surface tissue. Surface protection, absorption, and secretion. So that's going to be on the innermost side. We have the mucosa. And then outside of that, we have the submucosa here, okay, which contains the blood vessels and the nerves. And then we've got a muscle layer made up of smooth muscle, okay, which is here, and it's going to be both circular and longitudinal fibers. That way it can squeeze and propel the food and push it along the big tube. And then on the very outside we have what's called the serosa, so that's the very outer layer here. And again, this is outer protective layer and does secrete some fluid to make the tube slippery on the inside. All right, in animal digestive system, we have what's called chemical digestion and mechanical digestion. And they both serve to break down food into nutrients, but they do it in different ways. Mechanical digestion is going to break the larger pieces of food down to smaller pieces, and it's usually through muscular contractions and churning, peristalsis and such. And chemical digestion is going to break the smaller food particles down to the basic chemicals that are actually used by the body. And chemical digestion takes place using digestive enzymes. So we're going to talk about both of them because our bodies must use both in order to extract all the nutrients out of our food. All right, so like I had mentioned before, we have muscles in our digestive system. So your digestion, you're working out your muscles, but not the muscles that you're thinking of. You're working out your smooth muscles. And there's two types of movement along the alimentary canal. We have what's called segmentation versus peristalsis. Segmentation is like the churning movement that mixes food with the digestive enzymes. We see a good example of that in the stomach. And peristalsis is going to propel food down the tube. That's kind of how we see over here on the right. The picture on the right is of peristalsis, where it's like squeezing, squeezing the muscles closed here to push the food down in that direction. So that happens in the esophagus and also in the lower part of the stomach and throughout the intestines. Here's just an interesting picture of the time it takes for food to digest in a human digestive system. So in the mouth, okay, food's usually there between 5 to 30 seconds, depending on how long you choose to chew your food. Then in the pharynx, which is your throat, and esophagus, which is the tube that connects the mouth to the stomach, it takes about 10 seconds for food to pass down there. In the stomach, it'll sit there and start to get digested for about 2 to 4 hours. And then it'll be slowly squirted into the small intestines, where it travels there, and absorption takes place for another 3 hours. And then in the large intestines, that's where most of your food spends a lot of time. 20 to 48 hours. And the large intestine is going to be extracting lots of water and salts out of the food that you eat. And then in the rectum and anus, it's going to spend anywhere from 3 to 5 hours kind of just sitting there waiting to come out again. Alright, so let's start talking about this digestion stuff. The first part of digestion is going to take place in the mouth, or what we call the oral cavity. The mouth is composed of cheeks, the hard palate, the soft palate, and the tongue. It's going to serve as a site for the beginning of both mechanical and chemical digestion. So for mechanical digestion, remember it's taking big pieces and making them smaller. So the tongue is going to move the food towards the teeth, which breaks, as you chew, breaks the food down into smaller pieces. We also have chemical digestion going on in the mouth. Salivary amylase is an enzyme that is going to mix with the food, and amylase is an enzyme that breaks down carbohydrates. Okay, it starts to break down starches down to glucose. So carbohydrate digestion begins in the mouth with amylase. So inside of your mouth we have the tongue, and here's a little factoid for you. Your tongue is actually made up of more than 10 muscles kind of put together. So it's a very strong little part of your mouth. The outer surface of the tongue is covered with little projections called papillae, or taste buds, is what most people usually call them. And they're there for friction, and so that you've got little nerve endings there that help you taste the food that you're actually eating. The muscles in your tongue are going to, again, mix food with the saliva and push it forward towards the teeth and towards your molars so you can chew up the food. And it also puts the smaller food particles into what's called a bolus and pushes it back down your throat to help you swallow it into your esophagus. Now in the mouth region we also have salivary glands. These guys aren't actually in the oral cavity itself. They're sit outside the oral cavity in the skull. But they're going to secrete saliva into the oral cavity, and again that's going to help lubricate the food for swallowing, and it also breaks down food for digestion and also helps kill bacteria. So saliva is 99.95% water and about 0.05% enzymes like amylase. Alright, so after you swallow your bolus of food, it is passed into the pharynx, or the throat. So the pharynx is actually a pretty kind of delicate area because food could either go down one tube or another. That's kind of where the two tubes meet. One that goes to your stomach and the other that goes to your lungs. So we want to make sure the food gets to the correct place. We do not want food particles in our lungs. That can be very dangerous. So swallow food can actually enter the trachea if what's called the epiglottis, which is a little flap, fails to flip over and cover that epiglottis. So the epiglottis is here, okay, and when we swallow, it should close and let the food down the esophagus, not down the trachea. But of course sometimes that happens, and we get hacking cough or whatever, in order to get that food back out of the trachea and down where it's supposed to go. Now food gets passed into the esophagus, which is a long muscular tube that connects the mouth to the stomach. And the way that the food particles get there is through muscular contractions, like we had said before, called peristalsis. Okay, so let's talk about the next part of the digestive system, which is the stomach. The stomach is a J-shaped muscular sac that contains lots of folds called rugae and glands as well. And there's 4 basic regions of the stomach. We've got the cardiac region, okay, up here. We've got the fundus, okay, the body, which is basically the biggest part, and then the pylorus, which is the part that holds the sphincter that is going to let food from the stomach into the small intestines. Okay, so, and that pylorus has what we call the pyloric sphincter, which connects, like I said, the stomach to the small intestines. So food is going to spend about 2 to 4 hours in the stomach getting all mixed up. Muscular contractions, segmentation type of muscular contractions are going to mix the food with the digestive enzymes to produce what we call chyme. And this chyme, which is basically like this mushy, liquidy, kind of nasty looking stuff, is passed through the pyloric sphincter into the small intestines. So in the stomach, okay, we've got to have some secretions being made. One of those secretions is the enzyme pepsin, which is going to begin the digestion of proteins. So we'll have some amylase from our salivary glands that have been swallowed with our food, still digesting carbohydrates, and then the stomach, it starts to produce an enzyme called pepsin that's going to start breaking down any proteins that might be in the food. Along with it, we have hydrochloric acid that's also secreted in the stomach. We usually refer to that as stomach acid. And the function of that is to also aid in food breakdown, breaking down into smaller pieces, and it also helps to kill any bacteria that may have been swallowed along with your food. And then the last one, the last secretion from the stomach is called intrinsic factor. And intrinsic factor is just a little chemical that is going to help in vitamin B12 absorption later in the small intestines. All right, so we've got a whole bunch of hydrochloric acid being secreted in our stomach when we swallow food, and that hydrochloric acid is about pH 2, okay, which if you remember anything from chemistry, pH 2 is quite corrosive. So why doesn't the stomach digest itself? Well, lucky for us, the stomach has been created to secrete mucus, okay, big thick mucus membrane that coats the inner lining of the stomach. So we've got these cells here within the rugae of the stomach that are going to secrete mucus and kind of give it a big old thick layer of protection. So, and here's a little factoid. Your stomach produces a new layer of mucus every 2 weeks. Otherwise, it would digest itself. There you go. All right, so we could have some common stomach ailments occur during the digestive process. One of is called an ulcer, which is a hole in the lining of the stomach. And ulcers are usually caused by a bacteria called H. pylori. And what happens is that we see down here in this picture, the little H. pylori are able to get through that mucus layer and then infect the cells and kind of eat through the cells on the underside. So it's not a fun thing to have, but it can be cured with antibiotics. Now, a lot of people think that ulcers are caused by stress, not directly caused by stress, but stress can lower the body's defense mechanisms so that H. pylori isn't, defended against as well. And so we're more prone to infection and more prone to getting ulcers if you're under a lot of stress. Now, a second stomach ailment that you may have heard of is GERD. GERD is gastroesophageal reflux disease. Basically what happens is that stomach acid from the stomach is going to creep up into the esophagus and irritate it. The esophagus does not have a mucus layer, so anytime any stomach acid gets up there, it irritates it, it hurts, it burns. A lot of people call it heartburn, Now, GERD is basically heartburn, but on a chronic scale. So it's not just every once in a while, it is like all the time for these people that have it. And, one of the reasons why some people can get heartburn is that because the sphincter up here, the cardiac sphincter between the esophagus and the stomach doesn't close all the way or is loosened for some reason, and so the stomach acid can leak up into the esophagus. All right, our next little topic is a quite popular one here in America, where land of the glutton. Weight loss surgeries. So lots of people can't control themselves and what they eat, so they opt for a weight loss surgery called a gastric bypass, which has to do with the stomach. So we're going to talk about that right now. Basically, in a gastric bypass, a small pouch in the stomach is stapled shut. Okay, so that's the new smaller stomach that they'll get. So this is our little pouch of the original stomach that's kind of stapled off. And this part is then connected. Okay, they use part of the small intestines to connect that to the jejunum, okay, which is in the middle of the small intestines. So this here would connect, to the jejunum. So it bypasses a lot of the stomach, so it doesn't allow people to eat as much because there's not as much room as in their old stomach. And it also bypasses the duodenum, which is the first part of the small intestines, and so if you bypass some of the small intestines, you're going to allow for less absorption of calories and nutrients during digestion. So basically, they eat less and they absorb less, therefore they lose weight. All right, so let's talk about those small intestines then, where all that absorption of nutrients and calories takes place. So the small intestines is very, very, very long. They're not small in length, they're just small in diameter. So the small intestine is about 22 to 25 feet in length. So it is amazing that it all just kind of fits crammed in there without any kinks to, not allow food to get through. So it's amazingly designed. Now the small intestines is called small because it is only about 1 inch in diameter, okay, which we'll see is smaller than the large intestines. So the small intestines is all this creepy, crawly, wormy looking stuff right there. That is the small intestines. All right, we've got 3 parts to the small intestines. So food is going to come from the pylorus here. So here's the stomach. So food is going to come from the pylorus into the duodenum. Okay, that's the first part. And then we have the jejunum, okay, which is the purpley second part. And last but not least is the ileum, which is all the rest of it, okay, which is going to join up with the intestines at the ileocecal sphincter. So that was the structure, the basic structure of the small intestines. Let's take a look at some further kind of in-depth structure of it and the function. So the small intestines is going to contain lots of folds and ridges that are going to aid in absorption and increase surface area. Okay, and these folds are called villi. All right, so we can see over here on the right, they look like little finger projections. Okay, so it increases surface area for more absorption. All right. And the small intestine also contains intestinal glands that are going to secrete intestinal juices and enzymes for further chemical digestion of the chyme that comes from the stomach. So we're also going to get some enzymatic secretions from the pancreas and the liver as well into the small intestines to help break down the food into the chemicals that the body can absorb and use for survival. So in the small intestines, because there's tons of surface area, lots of villi and folds, the bottom line is that the more surface area we have, the more absorption that can take place. Alright, so the small intestines, like we had mentioned before, is for absorption. 90% of the nutrients are going to be absorbed in the small intestines. So remember, like I said, digestive enzymes from the small intestines, the liver, and the pancreas are going to be breaking down food, and all that those little food particles and chemicals will be absorbed via either diffusion, osmosis if there's water in there, or active transport, which we had talked about in previous lectures. So some enzymes that are going to be secreted in the small intestines include pancreatic amylase. So we're going to have even more amylase, because remember we said that only about 0.05% of the saliva has amylase in it. So we're going to need more to break down carbohydrates. So the pancreas also makes amylase that will be secreted into the small intestines. We have maltase, again, which is going to break down another type of carbohydrate, sucrase, and lactase. These are all sugar enzymes that break down different sugars. Trypsin is going to help break down protein. Bile is going to help break down fats or lipids. And bile is basically what the liver makes. The digestive enzyme that the liver makes is called bile. Okay, so as the food is going through these small intestines for about 3 hours or so, any unabsorbed food in the end that gets to the end of the ileum is going to be passed into then the large intestines. Okay, so let's take a look at these large intestines. So large intestines are actually pretty short compared to the small intestines. They're only about 5 feet in length compared to the 25 feet for the small intestines. But the reason why it's called the large intestines is because of the diameter. It's 2.5 inches in diameter rather than 1 inch in diameter. So that's why we call it the large intestines. Now in the large intestines there's no villi for increased absorption. There is absorption that does take place in the large intestines, but is not as to the scale as small intestines. So we have absorptive cells and we have what are called goblet cells. Alright, so we've got 4 regions of the large intestines that we'll talk about. The first is called the cecum. That's going to connect the small intestines to the large intestines. And right at the cecum we have the appendix, okay, that is attached right there. Then we've got the colon, and the colon can be further segmented into the ascending, transverse, and descending colon. And then down here we've got in the sigmoid colon, then we have the rectum, okay, in this part here, and the anal canal, where the feces is eventually expelled out of the body. So the colon is that longest part that we saw. We said ascending, transverse, and descending regions. So that's where a lot of the absorption for the large intestine is going to take place. The rectum is where feces is held before it is expelled through the anal canal. Alright, so in the large intestines, the biggest thing here that's going to happen is water and electrolytes or salts are going to be absorbed. So we don't have any enzymes that are produced in the large intestines. We just have a bunch of cells that are going to absorb. We have absorptive cells that are going to absorb water and salts. We have goblet cells, which are going to secrete basically slippery fluids to keep the poop kind of moving on through. In the large intestines, we also have bacteria. Lots of bacteria are found here that will break down cellulose and also make vitamins for our body that will be absorbed in the large intestines. So bacteria here is a good thing, okay, because they're going to break down some of the nutrients that we couldn't break down with our own enzymes. They're also going to provide us with some vitamins that our body can't make on its own, and that we might not be able to get because we lack the enzymes to do that. So bacteria, usually in their digestion, are going to release gases like hydrogen, methane, and carbon dioxide. So that's where we get our farts from, is the bacteria in our large intestines. And basically anything else that isn't absorbed, in terms of nutrients, water, or salts, is the remaining food that's called feces. Okay, so it's usually solid because a lot of water is being absorbed, but we'll see that it is actually, there's a lot more water that's still absorbed, or not absorbed, that make up feces. And if your feces is not solid, then your body didn't absorb enough water. All right, before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's talk about that little appendix that hangs off of our intestines, since it can be such a bother to some. Basically, it's a little worm-like structure that hangs off the intestines there, between the small and the large intestines. It does contain some lymphatic tissue to help protect against infection. We have bacteria in the large intestines, but not really any bacteria in the small intestines. So it is thought that it holds some lymphatic tissue that's going to help the bacteria stay in the large intestines and not in the small intestines. Now, in some people, it can get infected and inflamed, and it has to be removed before it gets too big and bursts, and all that bacteria is then let out into the abdominal cavity, which would be very bad. So if somebody does have an inflamed, infected appendix, we call that appendicitis, and they have to have an appendectomy to remove it. All right, let's talk a little bit more about feces, or poop. Okay, so when it gets to the end of the alimentary canal, okay, feces is going to be made up of actually 75% water. Okay, which is kind of amazing because there's already been a lot of water absorbed by your body. But poop is still made out of about 75% water. 12% is bacteria, 6% is shed epithelial cells, basically shed small intestine cells. As the food goes through, friction is going to kind of cause some of the cells to be slothed off, and so our poop is going to have some of that in there. And then only about 6% is indigestible material, indigestible food that we actually ate and put in our mouths in the beginning. So if we think about just the food that we start with, our body is able to basically process 94% of it, which is pretty good. Here's a little random factoid for you. Did you know that germs don't just cause disease, right? We have common bacterium, E. coli, is found in our intestines that help us digest green vegetables and beans. And this same bacteria, like I was talking about, also makes vitamin K, which helps us to clot blood. So if we didn't have these germs, we wouldn't be able to clot blood as easily, and we could bleed to death. So thank a germ today for helping you be able to clot your blood. All right, so let's talk about some large intestine ailments. We kind of skipped over small intestines. There are ailments that can be in the small intestines, like Crohn's disease and celiac disease and such. But that's, for another science class. In large intestines, pretty easy. If you've got an ailment, you either have basically diarrhea or the opposite, constipation. So if food is moving too fast, through the small and large intestines, for whatever reason, the body wants to get rid of it. There's, been some kind of contamination, bacteria found in it, so the body wants to get rid of it. You get diarrhea, very watery poop. So you got to be careful with diarrhea though, because remember you're losing all that water that's usually absorbed. So you're going to want to make sure that you rehydrate yourself and replace all of those salts as well that would be absorbed in the large intestines, but is not at this point because your body just wants to get rid of it. Now, if it's going too slow through the intestines, then you get constipation. Okay, so you basically too much water is kind of being absorbed. The poop gets a little too solid, harder to move through the large intestines, and harder to poop out. So you get constipation. So to help with that, you got to drink more water and eat more fiber in your diet. You could also take some stool softener medications as well, but more water and more fiber will usually help with constipation. All right, last but not least, about the colon, or the large intestine, is a colonoscopy. You guys really don't need to worry about this until you're much older, but a little factoid for you. You might want to, start letting your parents know that colon cancer is actually the second most common cancer in America, behind lung cancer. So it's not even breast cancer that's number one, like everybody thinks, because it gets so much publicity. Number one is lung cancer. Number two is colon cancer. So doctors will check yourself for colon cancer using a colonoscopy. Basically, it is a long little tube with a camera and the light at the end, and doctors will feed it up your butt and through your large intestines, looking for little polyps or cancer cells, and anything else that might be gone wrong in the colon. So usually people get their first exam, which is just a sigmoidoscopy, which just is going to kind of go this much into your colon at about age 40. And after that, you'll get, every about 3 to 5 years, subsequent exams that'll probably go further and further just to check to make sure that everything looks clear. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what you're putting in your body for it to digest. That's basically what we call nutrition. So nutrition is what you put in your body, and they're made of nutrients, which are substances and foods that is used by the body for growth, maintenance, and repair. And there's 5 major nutrients that basically our body uses and that food is made up of. So, and these are in order by which they are metabolized by the body. So, carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, vitamins, and minerals. So we'll start with carbohydrates, which is your cell's preferred fuel for energy. Right? Remember, your cells are going to use glucose, which is a carbohydrate. Break that down to make ATP. So carbohydrates are found in sugars and starches that are in fruits, vegetables, and other plant products. Grains, potatoes, all that. Lipids are also called fats, if you remember from earlier lecture in the semester. A couple types of lipids. Cholesterol is a lipid made by the liver to help in building cell membranes and making hormones and bile. So cholesterol is important for your body. Otherwise we couldn't make cell membranes and make new cells. Also helps make hormones and the digestive enzyme bile. However, too much cholesterol can clog your arteries. If your body has too much cholesterol in it, it'll just stick to the walls of your arteries and start to clog them. Cholesterol can be found in egg yolk and meats and milk products. The other type of lipid is the triglycerides. It's the most common type of fat in your body. And it's used in, again, making cell membranes, insulating neurons. Okay, so it's very important for your brain to have these triglycerides. And it can be used as a high energy reserve. So this is the kind of fat that your body can break down in order to get energy if it runs out of carbohydrates. So in the triglyceride category, we have unsaturated fats and saturated fats. Unsaturated are the healthy kind, found in seeds, nuts, and vegetable oils. Saturated fats, not very healthy. These guys are found in animal products and dairy foods. Next nutrient we'll talk about is proteins. Proteins are broken down into amino acids by the body, and your cells use these amino acids to build cellular components and enzymes. Your cells carefully conserve proteins and do not use them for energy. Okay, so carbohydrates and lipids can be broken down for energy. Proteins usually are not broken down for energy unless it's like dire straits. Proteins are found in eggs and milk, meats, legumes, which are beans and peas, and in nuts. Alright, another important nutrient that we get in our food, or you might take a supplement, like a lot of people. Down over here, we have vitamins. Vitamins are organic nutrients of various forms the body requires in just small amounts. All food contains vitamins, but not all vitamins are found in one type of food. So that's why it's important that you eat a variety of foods in order to make sure that you get all of the vitamins that your body needs. Now, vitamins are little organic compounds that are going to act as coenzymes. Okay, so they're going to help enzymes do their job in your body. So vitamins A, C, and E are what we call antioxidants. They're going to help enzymes clear the body of harmful substances and help fight cancer. So vitamins A, C, and E are found in broccoli, cabbage, Brussels sprouts, those dark green vegetables. Vitamin B is another type of vitamin that helps break down food into energy. So these are little coenzymes. They're going to help the amylase and the bile and the trypsin and all those other enzymes break down food in order to get energy. And so B vitamins are found in green beans, lettuce, potatoes, and in some meats. Alright, the last nutrient we're going to talk about are the minerals. Minerals are inorganic substances. So remember, vitamins were organic, so they've got, basically it's carbon-based. Minerals are not carbon-based. They are inorganic substances that help your body in functioning properly. So minerals include, calcium, phosphorus, potassium, sulfur, sodium, chlorine, like all those basically metals and nonmetals that you see on the periodic table. Those are what we call minerals. They have a wide range of function and include helping nerve signals. Your nerves are going to communicate with each other through basically concentration gradients of potassium and sodium. Muscle contractions are also basically done by calcium and phosphorus. No, I'm sorry, calcium and potassium. Hello. Calcium and potassium gradients, and a bunch of your components of blood. Your blood has hemoglobin, which needs iron. All right, and so those are just a few examples of why we need minerals as well in our diet. So the best sources of essential minerals are in vegetables, legumes, milk, and again, some meats. Alright, let's talk a little bit about metabolism. Metabolism is a broad term for all the chemical reactions that are necessary to maintain your life. So it includes the breaking down of substances to get energy, which is called catabolism, and also the building of structures from small molecules called anabolism. So both of those together are metabolism. So it's all of the chemical reactions that take place in your body. Now, energy value of food is measured in kilocalories, okay, or what we just call calories with a big C. So if you remember from chemistry about calories and being a measure of energy, food calories are actually measured in kilocalories. So if, 1,000 calorie in chemistry would just be 1 food calorie, when we're talking about metabolism. So the breakdown of carbohydrates and proteins is going to yield 4 kilocalories per gram. So that means every gram of carbohydrates that you ingest, or every gram of protein you ingest, you get 4 calories, food calories, or 4 kilocalories if you're talking about chemistry. Breaking down fats is going to yield 9 calories per gram. So when we, break down those triglycerides as high energy, high energy source of food, that is because each gram is going to yield 9 calories. So your metabolism is going to depend on your age, whether you're male or female, your activity level, and kind of other stuff like genetics as well. But here's basically a general idea, okay, about how many calories your body needs to perform the essential life activities like breathing, heartbeat, body functions. Basically, just essential life functions like those are what we call BMR, your basal metabolic rate. And we've got some calculations here, okay, for men versus women about what that BMR is. You could do these calculations, or you could just take a look online. There's all kinds of BMR calculators that you just punch in basically your weight, your height, and your age, and it'll give you your BMR, or your basal metabolic rate. So that is how many calories your body needs just to survive the normal life functions if you were just to sit there on the couch all day and do nothing. But to look at your whole perspective of your metabolism, you have to take a look at your activity level. If you're sedentary, okay, not very active, then you should be eating around as many calories as your BMR states, right? Because you're not really moving much. If you're pretty active, you should probably eat a few more calories so that you have enough energy to do your activity level. And if you're very active, involved in sports practices every day and stuff like that, you should eat even more calories just to make sure that your body has enough energy to do everything you are making it do. So basically the bottom line is, to maintain your weight, you should be eating as many calories as your BMR, okay? And to lose weight, you eat less. To gain weight, you eat more. So what should you be eating then? Well, every day, ideally, you should be eating about 6 ounces of grain, 2 to 3 cups of vegetables, 1 to 2 cups of fruit, 3 cups of dairy, and about 5 ounces of lean meats. So if you take a look at kind of that little pyramid there, most of your stuff should come from grains and vegetables, and very little from meats, and what you call it, like sweets and all that stuff. So if you're not eating as many vegetables as you should be, then try to eat more. Eat a rainbow of foods to ensure you're getting all of the vitamins and minerals as well for your body. All right. Another thing that's important to eat is fiber. Fiber is going to help your body maintain its regularity. Fiber is what we call indigestible plant materials. So they're found in whole grains and fruits and vegetables. Fiber makes you full, so you don't eat as much, but it is not absorbed as extra calories because it's indigestible. We don't have the enzymes to break it down, and the bacteria cannot break down all of it in our large intestines. So basically it provides what my grandmother used to call roughage to ease bowel movements or pooping, so it helps you poop easier, and it also can reduce the risk of some cancers. So you should be eating about 20 to 35 grams of fiber every day. All right, so that concludes our lecture on digestion and nutrition.